Hey, 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 happy Monday. Welcome. Another beautiful episode 34 of Go Fund Yourself. JD Gagnon here, good friend Kiara. What's up?
I have to say that last week we got approved on Spotify.
Whoop, whoop.
This is a big deal because the only other daily crypto news show I could find on Spotify that has their approval is a French show. So if you are an Anglophone and you want a daily news wrap up on the Ding Dong Go without a video stream, Spotify's your answer.
That is
I'm
it.
really pleased with myself because this is like the 5th podcast I've tried to put on Spotify, and usually I don't get approved.
Yeah, do you know why? I think it's because we're just fun and the quality's good, and we do a daily episode consistently. That's always important. But anyways, what are we talking about today?
It's just the weekend wrap up, There's quite a few things that went on, but there wasn't a lot of really big news. So we're going to do a quick update on Binance just so people don't feel that they're out of the loop. We're going to talk about the crypto arms race because I cannot help myself. And then you're going to tell us about Arbitrum. They had some news now, but it's also important to understand why this news is important to the space. And then if we have time, maybe we can talk about Mt. Gox because that's happening.
Alrighty, let's do it. All right, welcome back. Before we get to Binance, I got to do a quick shout out to the merch sponsor today.
I didn't know that was a merch. It looks so good.
It's not. Lululemon. Lululemon is the merch sponsor today. We're gonna tag them. Hopefully they're into it, and they're gonna send me some more Lululemon merch that I'll rep. Absolutely.
Also, you pretty much just told me that when we make merch, I should make it on Lululemon stuff because that hoodie is hot.
I like it. It's like super thin. It's like super thin too. It's amazing.
It's such a good pattern. Yeah, I love it.
I'm a big fan. So anyways, we'll get to Go Fund Yourself merch one of these days, but let's go to Binance. What's up?
Okay. Stop it. Okay. So in Binance, last week we talked about Binance quite a bit about how they had the absolutely new and kind of expected lawsuit. But what's interesting is that over the weekend, the China FUD gave out a little bit. So people don't seem nearly as fearful about that, probably because there's a new case against Binance. So I don't know if that's more or less funny. What do you think?
Yeah. So again, I don't know how much of this is conjecture. Honestly, like it's like the typical news leaks hyperbole, like typical nonsense. Like some of it is probably true, but by the time it gets to us, now they're working directly with Hamas, and they've been purposely and knowingly going around anti-money laundering rules and OFAC sanctions and all this other nonsense. I find that pretty hard to believe. Even the most, let's call them even the most negligent platforms in the space, like, know that AML globally and OFAC are not things that you can mess with, no matter what, ever. So, like, it's one thing to be willfully ignorant, which I think has kind of been the status quo for most platforms in the space. Like, oh, well, we'll just pretend we didn't know. But when you know about something, clearly, obviously, you can't go against anti-money laundering rules. So anyways, I find it hard to believe that regardless of what you think and all of the indiscretions that may or may not have happened at Binance, I find it hard to believe that this Hamas and other terrorists, whether you think Hamas is a terrorist organization or not, it's not one that you can comfortably do business with as a regulated entity or unregulated entity. You're not supposed to do business with them. Anyways, so do I think that happened? I don't know. If it did, I'd be pretty shocked. Like,
okay, so hold on. What is the news? What is the Hamas news?
So what I could gather, and again, this is like, it's super sporadic, like the information, which leads me to believe that no one really knows and that this is actually just a weird narrative. But effectively, there's some internal communications, apparently, that have somehow made it into the hands of whoever, regulators or news or somebody, that suggest that someone high up in Binance said something that, hey, I think this is like the counterparty here is Hamas or another organization, and then the other person said, yeah, doesn't matter, complete the transaction or something. Like it was, anyways, there's a whole lot of speculation still around this. So again, as always, when we say, hey, don't just blindly believe the FUD, there's probably some truth to this, but we don't know that. And the truth is probably,
did you see
in my
the
opinion,
new one about
which?
Somehow I got a new Ethernet cord. Did you see the new one about how influencers are being sold for promoting Binance as a security?
Yeah, this is going to continue. This stuff is why we need some sort of direction on regulation, because it's impossible to tell. It's impossible for people to act accordingly. In other words, every influencer currently, if everything becomes a security, every influencer is now exposed to lawsuits for representing unregistered securities. Like we got to figure that out, because it's a fairly large lawsuit. 1 billion, I think it was. Hey, yeah, 1 billion.
Yeah, it was huge. And it's three specific people from Miami and California. But one of the things that's wild to me is this retroactive potential. Like you just said, any influencer could then be under scrutiny.
I mean, and who's an influencer, and are they just sharing their input and ideas, or are they in fact trying to motivate people to do things? Like in the United States, there is free speech. There is the First Amendment, which doesn't exist in Canada. But in the United States, it still does exist, as far as I know, until we're told otherwise by our
cheeky.
Yeah. Anyways, as long as we have the First Amendment, we're entitled to opinions. And so there's a fine line and a bit of a gray area between what's my opinion and what's me trying to influence you. Now, by this, like if you paid me to say something about you, obviously that's ill-advised. If there's a suspicion that you may be a security. Anyways, that's
Binance. Binance is FUD, is what we're saying. Binance is still in the news. They haven't left the news. Lawsuits continue. Lawsuits will continue to continue. Is that the gist about Binance? The next one, because I can't help myself, is the crypto arms race. You know, I love the crypto arms race. This weekend, kind of Friday, Saturday, we got some big news from El Salvador. They are removing all taxes related to tech innovation for economic growth. This is for software, programming, coding, AI development, API computing, communications hardware, pretty well anything that's going to qualify as emerging technology in their emerging market is no longer going to be taxed. This is a huge move. This is exactly what we were talking about. Someone from El Salvador must be watching Go Fud Yourself and taking our, competitive market advice. I'm kidding. But last week we talked about how Canada was kind of missing out on a good opportunity to bring emerging technology to via crypto to Canada, because we're looking at people, fleeing America in a way with their money, and rather than going to Asia or Dubai or somewhere else that has more lenient, even the EU, places that are looking forward more with blockchain technology, they could have come to Canada. But El Salvador has beat us to the punch here by removing all taxes related to tech innovation for economic growth. That's wild. That's got a huge amount of, one, tax that they're going to miss out on, but two, that is a great way to open up a new GDP source. You are muted.
I've been muted this whole time. I've been talking that whole time, muted. Amazing. Okay. So I was saying, sorry, I muted my mic because my dog is losing his bloody mind. I don't know if you can hear him, but he's losing his bloody mind downstairs. No idea why. Anyways, long story short, this to me is a bit of a like cart and a horse thing, if that makes sense. Like the tax base doesn't currently exist anyways. Like they don't have these companies building this technology at meaningful scale in El Salvador. So them saying, hey, we're going to make this tax free isn't saying we're going to give up taxes that we otherwise would have had. So like, it's not that like, exciting from them. But at the same time, there are many other jurisdictions, BVI, Cayman, Panama, Seychelles, Cyprus, like quite a few other ones that have no tax, like at all for corporations. So like they're not the first ones to do this, but they're definitely coming to the table with a meaningful foot forward. What maybe makes El Salvador a little bit more appealing now, given this, is that you also know that their government is pro crypto, pro tech, and that's a little bit different from Panama, BVI, Cayman, etc. They have no tax on any corporation, most corporations, as far as I understand, which is fine, but they're not super crypto forward. They're still trying to figure out, do we like crypto? Do we not? BVI and the VASP Act, if you're interested, look into it. That just came out a few months ago that kind of changed the terms of the rules of engagement for BVI entities. So anybody that's listening, if you're a builder and you have a BVI entity and you don't know if the VASP Act impacts you, you should check with your attorneys, because there is some actions that have to happen there. Anyways, this is exciting. I think it's good. Again, probably not quite as exciting as the headline makes it sound, but I do think it's definitely a step in the right direction, and something that I, for one, will be asking our attorneys to look at as a potential domicile for some of our platforms.
Ooh, and then we could go to El Salvador.
El Salvador, at least like 10 years ago, was like one of the most dangerous countries in the Western Hemisphere. So
yes,
I'm not sure if I'm going to be going to.
But you're a high risk, high reward. I
am, but I've never been to BVI or Cayman. So, I've been to Panama, but not since we had corps there. So, I mean, I don't think I need to go to El Salvador, but we'll see.
The crypto arms race continues in Japan. Did you see this? Fujitsu filed a trademark for cryptocurrency services. I think this is really cool. They've been kind of vague about it, but the product is probably going to have to do with trading securities, insurance options, tax planning, and being a SEX for cryptocurrency, so centralized exchange for cryptocurrency. This is a big deal because not only does it signal that they're going to be doing that, but people are hypothesizing that other Japanese tech companies will also file similar trademarks and copyrights to essentially reserve their space, the real estate of names, more or less, which means it will be hard to know who's actually working on what.
Yeah, that's already happening in North America too. There's a lot of patents even that have been filed by large institutions on blockchain technology. Most of the ones that I've seen, there's better technology that already exists, but there definitely will be a legal patent play here later, in that if you happen to overlap some of the technology and they have a patent and you don't, obviously that's a problem, even if theirs is significantly inferior and they don't even use it. So definitely something to think about. I think this is good. Obviously, this is another signal that large companies in Japan are looking at regulated crypto and its potential impact on the space as a whole, and all of these things, which I think is great. It's good for their citizens. It's good for their society. Again, we'll probably get a whole bunch of this land grab for names and patents and trademarks and copyrights and all this other nonsense, which exists everywhere for everything all the time. Look at ENS, the ENS domains. Like nobody could get one at first, and within like 15 seconds, any name that you could possibly want is gone. Like, okay, it's kind of similar. But anyways.
That's the crypto arms race for today. Later this week, we are going to talk about CDBCs really in depth. I know that you hate them. And There's a lot of op-eds coming out about them, so we're just going to kind of review that. It's not today, but stay tuned for that later this week. Okay, final topic today, JD, is Arbitrum.
First, I just want to address how embarrassing. I talked for like 2 minutes muted.
So genuinely, I thought it was me because I've been having those speaker issues. So I said something and then you kept talking and I was like, all right, I guess he's good.
Man, I think I sent some like really good, I said some really good stuff there. I don't even know. Like maybe it was like the best content ever and you guys couldn't even hear it.
No, we'll never have it. So.
Anyways, all right. Okay. Arbitrum.
So there's some new news about Arbitrum, which is interesting and exciting, which is essentially that they are going to backtrack their governance proposal, which is a pretty big deal, right, to backtrack something. But I think that we need a little bit more of an overview for some of our crypto curious. Why do we care about Arbitrum? What is Arbitrum? And then we can talk about the proposal a little bit, but there's a lot of news about it. So,
okay. Arbitrum, easiest way to understand it is a layer 2 built on top of Ethereum. It's had a lot of fanfare, a lot of hype. They dealt with the airdrop narrative better than any other platform that I've seen. People that they had the narrative from day one. They got unbelievable usage statistics, unbelievable locked value, all because people were trying to figure out how to get this airdrop, which for many people was very sizable. If you did all the things properly and paid attention, it's 6 figures plus for a lot of people, with very little investment. Total investment is maybe $1,000 or less to do all of those things. So, anyways, to make a long story short, what happened here? There's a lot of misinformation around this one, and so I'm going to try to be careful and speak a little bit in high level terms, just so that I don't misstate a fine detail. But to make a long story short, there's all these Arbitrum tokens, okay? And the token has to have some value accrual mechanism. And DeFi, whether we love it or hate it, the value accrual mechanism is not platform revenues. It can't be, otherwise it's security. So what we've always been saying is the main utility is governance. Now, sometimes you can have that token be potentially a gas token in different ecosystems and different alt L1s, alt L2s. In this case, the gas token is not Arbitrum as far as I understand, or at least that's not the intention. So the only value accrual mechanism right now is governance. Okay. Now, everybody thought there was like a bunch of governance. They put the first proposal out there, and it wasn't going necessarily the way that they wanted. And the perception of people was that they completely backed out on it being binding, but rather instructive, which essentially leads to, if that is the case, which I don't think it is. So I've seen a few kind of counter arguments to this, and this is why I'm explaining it this way. The proposition here in a lot of the headlines is that Arbitrum went back against what they said. They're completely devaluing all value accrual for the token, blah, blah, blah. Why hold it? Whatever. If it's non-binding, centralized chain, yada, yada. Fair. That's a fair argument if that was completely true. But the counter arguments are saying, wait, maybe not quite that. It's not quite that cut and dry. Like this particular thing, this particular proposal, certain proposals at the beginning have to be kind of pushed through to set the parameters of governance. Like some things start somewhat centralized when you move from a team operating everything to a DAO. There's a kind of transitory phase, and some of that stuff has to be decided prior to governance being enacted because it affects how governance is enacted. So in this particular case, there's some counter arguments that they're not saying that all governance is going to be effectively just a temperature check as opposed to binding, but rather just the first couple things. So until they get the governance framework meaningfully ratified and launched, then they can lead to a lot more binding governance proposals. This, spiraled out of control because then everybody was up in arms and they were saying, oh, there's all these ARB tokens. What's happening with them? Like, are they getting spent? Are they used for voting? Are they? It turned into like 10 million different narratives. The original narrative was just governance is it ratified or is it a temperature check? What is it? Is it actionable or not? And then it turned into, well, who sold these 50 million ARB tokens? Was it the foundation? There was a bunch of speculation around that. They've said, no, it wasn't. But they did distribute some to a fairly large loan to a market maker and some other shit. Anyways, it's a big hodgepodge. It's not surprising, in my opinion, that there's some drama around this. It was the most anticipated airdrop of my entire time in the space. Everybody's been talking about it for a long time. They played that pretty nicely. And so there's just so much narrative around this. There's so many people paying attention to it that it's this actually in and of itself is one of my problems with governance. And although I think governance can, will, and should be highly useful, I think we have to be careful when governance is employed in the life cycle of a startup and why. And currently, governance is employed in startups, at least the vast majority of them, to avoid the perception of regulatory risk. So if it's a DAO, then you're not necessarily liable, but that's not true. That's not what happens. So if you look at BZX, which eventually became, I think, Omni or something, their initial core founding team was still charged and fined by the SEC, even though they had DAO'd long time ago. And there's all these different structures in place. If there's if they can prove negligence and they can prove that, you had an outsized say in things, you're still responsible. Anyways, the point is, I think the motivation for DAO is we're optimizing for the wrong conclusion. We're not saying, hey, governance is a better way to run these organizations, and it's a meaningful way to give people a say in the financial products and platforms that they're using. Rather, it's saying, hey, we're going to put governance in place regardless of what it does to efficiencies, just to avoid being having regulatory exposure. I have been saying this forever. Governance as we see it now is very difficult to operate startups there is a reason that in the largest countries in the world, democracies, everything, not everything is voted on by everybody. There's a reason for that. And so, there's a lot of governance structures that are being imagined that are pretty interesting. I just think in this particular case, because there's so much fanfare in Arbitrum, because it was, a fully diluted valuation, last time I checked, was 12 billion. It went from zero to hero overnight. And so obviously all eyes are on Arbitrum. So, so
there's bound to be FUD, right?
Of course. Of course. And so they have to, again, it's a startup. You have to adjust on the fly. If we knew all these answers way in advance, the opportunity would be gone, because that's why entrepreneurs do what entrepreneurs do, is try to find solutions that don't currently exist.
Exactly.
And so anyways, interesting to follow. I think we'll continue to follow this. To sum up the TLDR of my opinion on this, Arbitrum is for sure a useful L2 on top of Ethereum. I don't necessarily think that only Ethereum L2s exist, because there is meaningful limitations on their decentralization, on their efficiencies, and everything still needs to be settled back to ETH. There is a theoretical limit on scalability in these environments with L2s on ETH. And a lot of stuff happens off chain and all of these other things. Anyways, Arbitrum is here to stay. There's a lot of FUD around this, potentially a lot of misinformation, as always, unless it's something that is short-term going to be catastrophic for you. Maybe just wait a minute before forming an opinion is what I would say.
That's it for today. Subscribe, but also drop comments about what you want to hear about. I'm going to talk about the crypto arms race unless someone tells me to stop. So
yeah, subscribe, smash the share button, all that stuff, smash the bell on YouTube. Go check us out on Spotify so that we can stay on Spotify. Subscribe, please. Even if you listen on Twitch or YouTube or something every day, please still subscribe on Spotify. It helps us get in front of more people. Anyways, Kiara, go find yourself.
Go find yourself, JD. Happy Monday.
Everybody have a great week. Happy Monday.